Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, did you check out that thumbnail? 78 DPR archery build, and guess what? It is a monk. Now, I need to be just clear up front. This is going to end up being more of a cautionary tale than a build video. When I do a build, I go through the math I use to come up with the damage per round. And I know that's not very interesting. Hearing me drone on about percentage to hit and rounds per combat and uses per short or long rest times this minus this divided by that. Today I'm going to explain why I do that with a real example that came up 2 days ago in my Discord. So I was brainstorming for video topics. This would have been Monday, March 21st. And I was scanning my Discord community in the channel devoted to discussion about my YouTube videos. Often I get ideas from that because posters will often actually just give me ideas or suggestions about things I might do for videos. And I had recently released my video talking about the Think DM Monk fix. And the problems with Monk were being discussed by my Discord community. And then I came across this message. I've removed the name of the poster, otherwise this is as it appeared. Monks do okay in all optimized levels now, because once you get to the crossbow expert, sharpshooter, battle master, you also get to gunk. I really don't know what you're complaining about. Now, I'm usually pretty decent at decoding optimization forum code, but gunk is a term I hadn't heard before. I had, though, heard that a number of people now agree that Monk is actually a good choice for an archery build. That's because of 3 optional class features that came out in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So I'm going to discuss how that works. The first one is focused aim. So if you miss with an attack, you can spend 1 to 3 key points, and each key point you spend increases your result by 2. So this can potentially turn a missed attack into a hit. Like let's say you roll a 17 on an attack roll. DM says, whoops, you missed. You can go, I'm going to spend 1 key, and now it's a 19. Does a 19 hit? So that's the way that works. The second is key fueled attack. This allows you to make an attack with an unarmed strike or a monk weapon as a bonus action as long as you spend key with your action. So if you spend key on focused aim, you get a bonus action attack with a monk weapon. The issue is that monks normally don't have any ranged weapons as monk weapons. But that brings us to the third one, which is dedicated weapon. This allows you to touch a weapon that normally isn't a monk weapon, and then you can turn it into a monk weapon as long as you're proficient and it lacks the heavy or special properties. So the monk is proficient with a short bow, but it is not a monk weapon, but it qualifies for dedicated weapon. So now we could use the sharpshooter feat. We could get extra attack at level 5, bonus action attacks through key fueled attacks, and I guess that makes you a good archer. If you're a Kensai monk, then you can use a longbow, which is a heavy weapon, so normally wouldn't qualify for your dedicated weapon, but we can use Kensai weapon, which is a subclass feature, to make it into a monk weapon. So I was already familiar with this interaction, but I had basically discounted it. Now I didn't do the math for it, I just discounted it because so many monk features require you to be in melee for them to work, so it seemed like you're pretty much giving up everything a monk can do in combat, other than moving fast, and then what you get is a character that doesn't get the archery combat style or any real decent archery features. You're just attacking 3 times around, twice with your action, once with your bonus action. Any character with extra attack can be made to do that. And the numbers are usually okay, but we look for other things they can do to contribute. Like if we were to do a swords bard, we can get okay numbers, but we get inspiration, we get all the spell casting. Monk really isn't giving us anything except move fast. So I had to ask for some clarification. And I was told the reason why a monk archery character was considered to be good was because of focused aim. So the 1 to 3 key points you can spend to get a bonus to your attack roll. Now, I hadn't done any math at this point. I was still guessing. But my instincts told me this was just going to be worse than a battle master using a hand crossbow. So I mentioned that. Is focused aim any better than precision attack, though? I guess it's not random, but unless you know the armor class you're trying to hit, I'm not sure how much of an advantage it not being random is. It's certainly not better than precision attack plus action surge plus extra attack. And this was a conversation with a different person, so I'm calling them remove 2. Yeah, I wouldn't even try to do the maths myself, but I know other people smarter than me have done the maths, and it turns out favorably according to their reports. Now I hear DPR numbers all the time. I hear things being good all the time, and then I often see them and I see issues. So I responded, I'm skeptical. Have they posted their math anywhere? Or is it a case of, I did the math, trust me? Man, we see this a lot. And they said, I think there's stuff coming out on, and they mention a couple websites. Now, I admit I didn't go to those sites because, to my knowledge, they don't show their work, so it seemed like a waste of my time. Besides, if we're going to do a build for this, then I'm fine getting some feedback on my thoughts or get ideas from comments like monks work okay in all optimized levels with ranged. But if I just present somebody else's build, then I need to get their permission to present it. I have to go through that spiel I do sometimes. This isn't my build. So-and-so did this build. And also, I don't get to make the build, which is what I like to do. So I responded, maybe I'll just do the math myself. I've been looking for some video topics to work on this week, and they said, I think the trick is that focused aim gives you bonus action attack, so you don't need crossbow expert. Now, at this point in the conversation, I remembered I'd been talking with my friend Pack Tactics in a different Discord community. If you don't know, Pack Tactics is another optimization channel that is really popular. And the person who runs that channel and I are friends, and we've been friends quite a while before he ever started his channel. We chat online regularly, and we've played D&D together many, many times. We have differing opinions on optimization. In fact, we have some very dramatically differing opinions on certain optimization things, but there's lots of other things we totally agree on, and it doesn't really matter. We just like each other. At this point in the conversation, I suddenly remembered that he had shared with me that he planned to do a monk video. So you should check it out when he releases it. As I record this, he hasn't released anything yet, but maybe he has by the time I release this. I'm not sure. But I suddenly wondered if this video might be stepping on his toes. I think Pack Tactics might be doing a Kensai archery build on his channel in the next few weeks. I don't want to ninja him. He mentioned doing a monk vid. I'll double check with him if that's his topic. So I went and talked to Pack Tactics. Is it going to be a Kensai longbow build with a fighter dip? I was considering punching some math on this, but if you're doing it, I don't want to duplicate. And bagpipes, Pack Tactics, a lot of people know him also as Bagpipes because he plays the bagpipes, says nope. So I responded, okay, math time. Okay, I'm in the clear, another monk vid. My viewers are going to be so pleased. Then Remove 3 said, better than back when all the comments were, Treant Monk, when you gonna do a monk build? Yeah, I guess so. Okay, so now I'm doing the math. And the numbers aren't like terrible, but this is not where I would say this is turning out to be okay at all optimized levels. Definitely not where I'd actually present this as a good build on my channel. Here's the thing about the archery monk. Like, you're a battle master fighter archer. Then you're using things like tripping attack to bring down flying dragons, or menacing attack to impose conditions on your enemies. But a monk who can't do stunning strike or any melee feature is just contributing damage, and they're not really contributing anything else to combat. If a build only does damage, then I would expect it to be 50% over my baseline, which is if you took a subclassless warlock, raised its charisma as you go up in levels, took agonizing blast, and applied the hex spell to enemies. Like, the baseline that I use is not hard to achieve. It's the level where I would say damage isn't irrelevant anymore, but if you're really only doing damage, you should have at least periods where you're 50% over or even twice the baseline before I'd consider it an optimized build. And if you can't meet those targets, then you need to contribute something else. And the build I was working on really wasn't. It was just damage, and it wasn't enough. So I figured I'd better talk to the person who had said that the monk was okay at all optimized levels. So the next day, I asked them for some more details. I would assume custom lineage with crossbow expert at level 1, and they said custom lineage gunner. All right, so the gunner feat was released in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It gives you proficiency in firearms. It gives you a +1 to an ability score, and it allows you to fire melee without disadvantage, and allows you to ignore the loading property of firearms. So I responded, oh, that's a bit different, because I had done all my math on bows. We're using optional Dungeon Master Guide rules then? And yes, we're using the musket. I see. Yeah, that's something I normally wouldn't count on. And then they said, although bow works well enough. So if the Dungeon Master's optional rules are not used, then the longbow? Yes. Okay, so let's talk about muskets. So the firearms rules, if you're not aware, and I think you could be easily forgiven if you aren't, are in the Dungeon Master Tools section of the Dungeon Master's Guide. This is a chapter, it's full of optional rules that a DM might consider using. If you've heard of gritty realism, this is where you'll find that. You'll also find things like hero points, healing surges, alien technologies, speed factors, hitting multiple creatures with single attacks, and you'll find firearms. So the musket does a d12 damage, it's a two-handed weapon, has a loading property. So I guess the idea would be in a campaign where the DM is using the optional rules for firearms, you would take the gunner feat, which allows you to ignore the loading property, and then you make it a dedicated weapon, and you get a d12 weapon. Then you would still take sharpshooter, but you'd have to wait, I guess, until level 4 to get that. Now, I don't assume optional rules. So, like when I do a video about initiative, I don't talk about using speed factors to get additional bonuses because my assumption is they're not available. So that's why I asked if a longbow worked, because if I'm going to do a build, I'd rather it be a build that works at most tables. However, I was told here that longbow works. So I asked for some more details. Fighter dip, then switch to monk at 2. No, monk 5 or 6 to start, then fighter 1, though with Kensai, you can dip fighter first. And I said I would go Kensai for sure. It seemed kind of obvious to me to go Kensai because Kensai is really the only subclass that can do anything with ranged weapons. And they said, actually, Shadow is way better, and Long Death arguably so. Okay, so like I said, my damage numbers are looking like I can't present this build on my channel, and I'm looking for options to get more damage. I wonder if they mean that the Shadow Monk can use Darkness and Devil's Sight to get advantage, and I'm not thrilled about that possibility, because first of all, I have some problems with it. It's not as reliable as it's often presented. Maybe I'll do a video on that at some point. But unless your whole party has Devil's Sight, it can cause all kinds of restrictions on other party member features. And I'm not saying it's always bad. But again, if that's the answer, I'm not thrilled. So with Shadow, are we grabbing Eldritch Adept? Nope. The only spell being cast from that feature is Pass Without Trace. And maybe Darkness in very rare instances, I guess. So basically, the play is 2 key, Pass Without Trace, and then basically keep it up as long as possible. Yeah. It's quite easy in mid to high optimization, since enemies should be targeting casters. Okay, so I need to explain what is meant. They refer to mid to high optimization. These are not my terms, but I've been seeing them pop up on my Discord community more and more these days. So there is an optimization community that isn't affiliated with me or this channel, and they use the terms low, mid, or high optimization to rank other people's proficiency at optimizing. At least I think that's what they do. These, again, they're not my terms, so I might not be representing them well. But as I understand them, this is how it works. If you aren't very good at optimizing, then you're low optimizing. If you're so-so, then you're mid optimizing. And if you're excellent, then you're high optimizing. Naturally, they award themselves the high optimizer label. I think I got awarded the mid optimization level, so I guess I could have done worse. I mean, I don't want to assume the worst, but it does kind of sound nasty to me. But I want to give the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I misunderstood the meaning. If you're interested, Google it, and I'm sure you'll find out more than I know. But if you've never heard these terms before, that's what they mean as far as I know. Either way, the point they're making is that in optimized games, archers don't get targeted by enemies. That's not my experience, by the way. In the more optimized games I play in, the tougher enemies almost always have some area of effect options, often as legendary actions. And since I'm a quote-unquote mid-optimizer, I can't imagine what creatures can do in high optimized games, because the ones I face in my tougher campaigns, being an archer is no protection. So then they asked me, do you know how to calculate average times you'll be attacking as a bonus action and average hit chance post-key expenditure? So this is about determining how key interacts with our bonus action attacks. Anytime you spend key with your action, you get a bonus action attack. And if you don't, then you don't. Then with focused aim, we can turn misses into hits. I had spent a lot of time already determining some formulas that would somewhat accurately represent how often these things occur. Basically, the formula I came up with is this. So if you're going to miss by 1 or 2, that's a 10% chance. There's 2 results on a d20 that are going to miss by either 1 or 2. So 10% of your attacks at least have the opportunity to be turned into hits by spending a single key point. Then I had to determine how many attacks were we going to have. Well, 2 with our attack action and then some more bonus actions. I figured if we spent all our key on our actions, we would have a bonus action for every key point we had. Then it was a matter of determining how often of those opportunities would we know? Would we know the armor class we needed to hit, or would we guess correctly? Because if we guess wrong, then a miss will still be a miss. And I thought I was pretty generous. In fact, in order to make my numbers work, I was probably overly generous. And yeah, so that's basically what I did. Once we got into 2 key, then it was really a matter at higher levels. Once we had more key, that was maybe worthwhile. 3 key for +6, it would just never made sense. And that's just because you give up 2 bonus action attacks in order to spend 3 key on a single action. And like I said, my math wasn't showing a very viable build. So I responded, yes, I worked on that yesterday, and they said, great. And then I went back to the drawing board and I started doing more math, looking at Shadow Monk, looking at dipping fighter at level 1, looking at dipping fighter at level 6. The best I could come up with is Kensai with the fighter dip at 1. Levels 2 to 5 weren't great. Level 5 was atrocious. And then after that, by level 6, the Kensai can at least meet baseline from level 6 and higher. Sometimes they're barely scraping over it. Other times they get 30 to 35% over, which isn't terrible, but it's not really like an optimized damage build yet. It certainly was never at a point where I would have been comfortable presenting it in a video to you as an optimized build. I started thinking maybe I would do a video where I presented it as a failed build. I recently had a request to do videos on builds that didn't work out, and this was starting to look like an opportunity to do exactly that. So I went ahead and I recorded a video. I showed my math, I presented it as a failed build, and then I speculated as to why I'd heard it was so good. I'm not going to release that video because I figured this was a better opportunity to talk about why you hear some things are so awesome. You're told the math has all been done, and then you play the build and it doesn't work as advertised. Because essentially, that's what happened here is I was told this build works really well at optimized tables and the math has all been done. You don't need to do the math, this works. Then I did the math and I checked it myself and it didn't work. And I worked on it and worked on it and I could not get it to the point where I felt it was an optimized build. And that is the topic I wanted for this video because this happens to everybody. You go online, you see these thumbnails, 5,000 damage around. Well, how do you get that number? And just because somebody tells you that something does so much damage doesn't mean they're telling you that in bad faith. It doesn't mean they're trying to trick you. In fact, I have no reason to believe that Removed was trying to trick me at all. They were trying to help me. But I didn't know how they came up with the assumption that this was optimized. And what they consider optimized and what I consider optimized might be 2 different things. I'm not the arbiter of that. But there's also the possibility I was missing something, because I didn't know the details of how they came up with the idea that it was optimized beyond what they had given me, and that still wasn't very much. I knew I needed more information. So I said, I've been punching math. Shadow Monk numbers look okay around level 6 after a dip in fighter. Numbers continue to drop as levels increase against other range builds I've punched the math for. We eventually fall below baseline. Kensai can at least achieve baseline for most levels, so that's the way I'll go with the video, but I'll mention the Shadow Monk. And they said, oh, also, I forgot about Kensai. When exactly does it fall below baseline? It doesn't make much sense to me since Kensai damage actually scales pretty darn well, eventually reaching around 60. So 60 DPR for a Kensai build. Now we are getting to the meat of this video. My numbers had the 20th level Kensai just over 40 DPR. This number was half again as high. So why did they come up with 60 DPR and I only came up with 40? I had double checked my math. I was sure my math was right. I had double checked all the features available to the Monk and the Kensai and made sure that we were making the most of all of them. So is the 60 DPR wrong? No, not necessarily. I use certain assumptions when I calculate DPR, and I hold myself to the same assumptions, or I try to, from build to build, and I try to go over them in the build. And if they make wildly different assumptions than I do, they're going to get wildly different results in DPR. And that's my point, is if I'm going to go over all this stuff in the video about how I came up with every single number and what assumptions I made, this is why I do it, because my DPR number is pointless if you don't know where it came from. Now at this point, I am confident that my math is correct, and I'm reasonably confident their math is correct too. I really, at this point, am of the belief that the reason our numbers are so different is because we calculate DPR in different ways. And I come up with some assumptions that I talk about in the original video I did, the build video. And what I really want to do at this point is kind of confirm, were my guesses correct, or was there something else that was causing this difference? So I said it falls below baseline in tier 1, then it's over in tier 2, 3, and 4, but it gets nowhere close to 60 DPR. I haven't seen the math for the 60 DPR, so I can't be certain why the difference, but I go over some guesses in the video. If all goes well, I should be releasing it next week. So I'm going to play you the clip of the video where I did that speculation. And here it is. But I do think most of them are calculated. I think there is math behind them, but I suspect there are some faulty considerations. And I can't confirm that because I haven't been shown the math. But here's a few things that I suspect have skewed that math. First, you can't just assume that you can spend all your key points to turn misses into hits. You won't always know which ones can be switched, or how often you'll misjudge. In this math, I think I've been fairly generous. In fact, in some cases, I've assumed you're batting 1,000. I just don't think you should expect that. Second, there's something here you might have noticed, and that is I didn't use Sharpen the Blade. At 11th level, you get Sharpen the Blade. You get the ability to augment your weapons further with your ki. As a bonus action, you can expend up to 3 ki points to grant one Kensai weapon you touch a bonus to attack and damage rolls when you attack with it. The bonus equals the number of ki points you spent. This bonus lasts for 1 minute or until you use this feature again. This feature has no effect on a magic weapon that already has a bonus to attack and damage rolls. If I was to throw this into my calculations for damage, my damage would increase on the screen, but I would be disingenuous to do so. The damage calculations I've shown you today have all assumed no magical weapons. The reason I do this is because I don't know what magic weapon you're going to have at which level. However, if you forget why we don't calculate damage for magic weapons, then you really can skew the numbers by pretending that your 12th level character isn't going to have a magic weapon at all. So suddenly Sharpen the Blade is basically +3 to hit and damage. But it's not going to be that. And there's a good possibility it won't be a benefit at all. And if we assume no magical weapons because we don't know what you're going to have, then soon as I apply Sharpen the Blade, now I'm saying I do know what you're going to have, and it's going to be nothing. And that doesn't do anything for us. It doesn't give us any information. Yes, if you are 12th level and you don't have a magic weapon, or even if you only have a +1 weapon, then Sharpen the Blade will help you. But by the time we get to, even a +2 weapon, it becomes iffy. And by 12th level, there's a very reasonable possibility you will have a +2 weapon. And third, and most importantly, it is important if you're doing optimization to set some rules you stick by. Because when you put a lot of effort into a build, and I've been there, you want it to work. So confirmation bias is hitting hard, and it starts to affect your results. Because I've done it. I mean, I've got builds and I go, if I had fewer rounds before a short rest, then my numbers look better against the baseline. Yeah, but that baseline was set assuming those conditions. Okay, so that's why I figured we came up with different results. So in discussing why their build does 60 DPR, they said it's because with 2 encounters per short rest, you can reliably cover all misses 1 through 6. So they're meaning if you miss by 1, you miss by 6, you can turn it into a hit, and we can use the +3 weapon feature. So that's Sharpen the Blade. So yeah, my guesses were pretty good, but we kept talking. I brought up the issue I talked about in the clip with adding Sharpen the Blade to the DPR numbers. They responded, okay, but if you've got something better than a +3 musket, then you've got something better than a +3 musket, which is not common or comparable. +3 musket is like the second best thing you can get, unless your DM gives you modern and futuristic firearms. Now, I think there's a flaw in the reasoning here, and that is that this idea that we need to be using a musket. We don't need to be using a musket at this point. Our martial arts die is scaled to D10, so that's not very far behind D12, and then we can use any ranged weapon, turn it into a monk weapon, and get pretty much the same results. I mean, the difference will be minuscule, and if we're giving up our bonus action to do sharpen the blade, then that difference actually is going to probably put the musket behind. Here's the math. A D12 weapon does 1 point more damage on average than a D10 weapon. If you use sharpen the blade, even if you have enough ki to do so, you're also giving up a bonus action attack, since it takes a bonus action to use and it only lasts a minute, so you just can't expect to do it out of combat. So I'll just make the math simple here. Let's say we're doing 10 points of damage average on each attack. So 2 attacks gives us 20, and a bonus action attack gives us 30 damage. Now let's say we use a musket with sharpen the blade and turn it into a +3 weapon. So that's 1 point of extra damage if we hit, but we don't always hit. With sharpshooter, we're going to hit about half the time. So after the math, it's about half a point average extra damage per attack. So our first round of combat, we do 10.5 twice and no bonus action attack. So instead of doing 30 damage, we do 21 damage. And even if you assume we hit more than half the time, it's never more than 22 damage. After the first round, we'll do an extra 1.5 extra damage per round, assuming we get our bonus action attack. So we would need 7 rounds of combat with this musket, with sharpen the blade, to even equal the damage of a +3 sling. And we spent 3 ki for this on top of that. Even if we hit 100% of the time, we would do about equivalent damage in a 4-round combat. Now, I'm not telling you that you will definitely have a +3 ranged weapon at level 20. There's a reason why we don't include it in DPR numbers, because we don't know what you're going to have. But I think I can confidently say that you should have a better chance of a +3 ranged weapon than having a 20th level game where you haven't gotten a magic ranged weapon at all. And that's the assumption you have to make if you're going to add +3 from sharpen the blade to your DPR numbers. So when you see DPR numbers for, say, a hand crossbow using Battlemaster at 20th level, that assumes no magic weapons. Now, we're not assuming your Battlemaster doesn't have a magic weapon. We're just not including it because we don't know what that magic weapon will be. But if we now take those numbers and compare them to a monk using sharpen the blade to get +3, then that's not a valid comparison anymore, because now we actually have to assume that 20th level Battlemaster doesn't have a magic weapon in order for that comparison to be valid. And they will. So suddenly, as soon as we apply sharpen the blade, we're not getting good numbers. But basically they said that the musket was still a net gain in DPR. So even if you can use it in every combat, and let me check, and I did the math that I just presented to you, yeah, it's worse than the +3 longbow, which it is. And they said, what? No, that's just not true. And they asked me, how are you doing your math? Musket does not do 1 point more damage, first of all, due to focused aim being a thing. Now, this didn't make any sense to me at first. And I said, it's a D12 versus D10. I mean, that's 5.5 versus 6.5. That's 1 damage. And they said, no, it's a D8, not a D10. And this is totally understandable. We forget about the monk martial arts die when we start with a D12 weapon, because the martial arts die suddenly becomes irrelevant. But it does become relevant if we get a magic weapon that isn't a D12 weapon. So with that context, I actually did understand what they're saying. What they're saying is the musket does not do 1 more point of damage, first of all. They're saying that because they assumed it was doing 2 more points on average, and that maybe I was having it for a chance to hit, which I was, and then they're saying so it ends up being more than 1 because you're going to hit more than half the time because of focused aim. We'll get into that. And if they had been correct, the longbow is still doing D8 at this level, they would have somewhat of a point, but still it's not that much. What's your chance to hit? 60%, 70%, 80%, 100%? Even if in a 4-round combat, we're not really getting any advantage. And they did mention a +3 longbow isn't very reliable either to get, though. And this is 100% true. You absolutely don't know what magic weapons you're going to get. But if you're going to apply sharpen to the blade to your numbers, then any magic weapon at all makes those results invalid because we're comparing it to not having magic weapons at all. And also, I should say, it is meaningless to say that a build does X amount of damage per round, assuming we have 4 rounds of combat per short rest, unless every time you do DPR, that's your assumption. I use 16 rounds of combat per short rest, and I use it all the time, and I never change it. But you know what? If you use 4 rounds of combat per short rest and you use it every time, that's every bit as valid as what I do. So if this person is always assuming they're going to have 2 combats per short rest, that doesn't mean their DPR numbers are wrong, but they're definitely wrong for this channel because those aren't the assumptions I use. Because we can take the exact same build and get totally different DPR numbers. So yeah, if I took all my builds and I reduced it to 2 combats per short rest, all my DPR numbers would be much, much higher. And so it wouldn't be valid for me to do that with one build and not for all the others, because then the comparisons become pointless. But they mentioned the musket and the +3 longbow math are extremely close. Therefore, if you don't have a +3 range weapon, a non-magical musket is your best choice. And a floor for that damage is about 69 damage, which is pretty funny. That is pretty funny because it was 60 not that long ago, but now it's 69. Also, that's considering you'll never set the magical weapon thing beforehand, in which case it's 78 DPR. So now we're getting into DPR numbers that are twice the numbers I came up with for the exact same build. And again, I'm not suspecting mathematical errors, and I don't think I made any mathematical errors, but we have DPR numbers that are so different that in one case it looks really bad, in another case it looks really good. And this is why you need to know. You need to know where these numbers come from, because 78 DPR doesn't mean this is an optimized build. You need to know how they came up with 78 DPR. And as soon as you start putting some assumptions, like the ones that I normally make, suddenly it's clearly not an optimized number. So I thought, there's our thumbnail. 60 DPR, 69 DPR, 78 DPR. I still haven't seen the math to come up with these numbers, but honestly, at this point, I don't even need to see the math anymore. I know why our numbers are so different, and it's not because I made a math error, and it's not because they made a math error. It's because they are using very different assumptions in order to calculate this DPR than I did. And we now know that they were assuming that Sharpen the Blade was going to give you a +3 to hit and damage compared to the weapon you would otherwise be using. And that's only valid if that other weapon is non-magical. And I wouldn't make that assumption. The second thing they were assuming was less combats per short rest. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it is going to give us massively different results. So the last piece of the puzzle is focused aim and how often you are able to turn misses into hits. So like if you make an attack roll, do you always know exactly how much you need to add in order to turn a miss into a hit? And my assumption would be, no, you don't always have that information. And if you assume you do have that information, you are going to get very different results. And if I'm going to present a build on my channel, I don't think I could make that assumption. I think it would be incorrect for most tables, but it is something we needed to work out. So they said, that's not how you do gunk DPR. Simply put, I asked you about this before, and you said you knew how, but you don't. I said, I'm suspecting your method is incorrect, but I haven't seen it. So they posted it. And this print is small, but this was a screenshot, so I couldn't copy and paste it into a more readable text, but I'm going to read it for you now. So this is how they calculate focused aim. I calculate how many misses by 1 to 2, then 2 to 4, I assume they mean 3 to 4, and then 5 to 6. Then I cover all those misses with key, prioritizing lower key cost. I recalculate chance to hit, accounting for the misses covered. And I didn't need to read any more. And basically this is the idea, is that you automatically know if you use focused aim, whether it's going to work or not. So I said, I see a mistake right away. So round 1, you win initiative, you roll 15 on the attack, the DM announces that you miss. How much key turns that into a hit? And if you don't know the answer, then that method is flawed right off the bat. And they said, I do assume armor class is easily known, as it has been in all the games I've played in. I responded, my general experience is the DM doesn't announce the armor class of the enemy. I think that's the standard. They said, it's very easy guesswork, especially when you see the enemy wearing armor. Okay, so that's not always true. even with published monsters. Like, for example, the Cambion wears scale mail, but it has an armor class of 19. Normally, 16 would be the maximum, so you're going to be making wrong guesses at least sometimes, even then. But most monsters don't wear armor, so I gave an example. Okay, so the 15 was against this guy. How much ki to turn your 15 into a hit? They said, I'm guessing 1 ki would be enough unless that thing is unnaturally dexterous. And I responded, I mean, you could be right. I don't know. I haven't statted out the monster yet. Could have an armor class of 18 too. Maybe those spine things are really tough. Sometimes you don't know, is my point. Unless your DM is just picking common monsters everybody knows. To which they responded, also, I generally play in games where official stat blocks are used. This I found really interesting. Now, I want to make it clear what they're saying here. Yeah, we don't know the armor class of a homebrew creature because the DM made it up. But what if we're fighting one of the hundreds? Actually, it's thousands of creatures that have been officially published somewhere. Now, maybe they've memorized the thousands of armor classes, so when they fight the Living Blade of Disaster, they can remember it has an armor class of 14. I doubt it. That's a massive amount of memorization. Maybe they look up the stat blocks. That sounds more likely. In most tables, that would be cheating. But maybe not at their table, so I'm not going to judge. If that's the way they play and the DM is on board with it, then that's fine for them. But seriously, we're going to present this like this is the norm? To which we concluded our conversation. He said, I guess your way of dealing with optimized characters is different than what I normally see. I guess your method is generally almost correct for your players. Now, I don't know if that was intended as a dig. I didn't take it as a dig because, yeah, I would 100% agree with that. DPR is not a very good tool. There are so many assumptions you make. How many rounds, magic weapons, chance to prepare before initiative, opportunities to get surprise, average armor class of enemies, and countless other assumptions. And I want to be clear that I had no indication this person I was talking to was providing these results in bad faith. But this is why you need to know how the DPR is calculated and what assumptions were made in doing it. It's not enough for the person who presents the DPR to tell you the math is all checked out. That doesn't mean anything if you don't know what the assumptions were in the calculation of DPR. Because these numbers assumed a lot of things that I don't think would be valid at the average table. Might be valid at their table, but not the average table. So I couldn't possibly present these numbers on my channel in good faith. It would be disingenuous for me to do that because I would be making assumptions that I think don't apply to you. And maybe those assumptions are correct for their table. Maybe they don't get magic weapons in their games. Maybe they are allowed to look up stat blocks and monsters in their games and then decide to spend ki on ki focused aim after they see the armor class of the creature. Maybe all these things are correct at their table, and that's fine. They're allowed to play however they want. And that's the thing. Different tables use different rules. And even if we are using the same rules, we have different experiences at the table as well. So yeah, that's kind of why I figured the point of this video should be about that. Yeah, I show you a bunch of boring numbers. I walk you through boring math. I tell you why I make the assumptions I do. And more importantly, tell you what those assumptions are and how I came up with them. And I do my best to try to keep the same assumptions from video to video so that if you're looking at various builds I make, then hopefully the DPR numbers actually have some value. But I just want to say that this person didn't do anything wrong. They're trying to help me come up with a video idea, and by their calculations, this Monk Archer is going to deliver good damage by their standards. But it doesn't meet my standards, and that's why I can't present this build to you. I don't think it is optimized using the assumptions I make for calculating damage. So this video obviously didn't end up where I was originally planning it to go, but I thought it was still important to make because whether DPR is a good tool or not, we use it to evaluate optimized builds. And you should know that sometimes the numbers mean something and sometimes they don't. If you are just told that a build does X number of damage and they don't explain why and how and what assumptions they make, then that number doesn't mean anything, even if the math was all done correctly. So thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you again soon.